I had, mentioned that we do live outside of the city. And one of the key images for this novel was that we drive into our closest city, and driving through all of these houses on top of houses on top of houses with all these postage stamp lawns, and everything looks the same. And, if the systems like what are going on, globalization, were to break down, we're seeing little snippets of what it might feel like if those systems stopped working. And so if the systems break down, it's like those little houses are all going to be deserted. And what is that going to look like?
Hey, everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Giss McDonald, founder, CEO of Paper Raven Books. And I have with us today two special guests. They are co-authors. They are partners in writing. They are releasing their brand new book called Interface. It is the first book in a series. And if you like action and you like thinking about the future and slightly dystopian and technocrats and thrillers and things like that, then you are going to want to stay tuned for this interview. Ron Haycock, Karen Walasek, thank you so much for being here, you guys.
Great to be here.
Great to be here.
So tell us a little bit about Interface. Who do we get to meet and what's happening at the beginning of the book?
The beginning of the book starts with the grandfather, Chandler, when he meets his 5-year-old grandson that he's never met before. The child's parents have been killed, and he has received the child, Emerson, and he's come down to live with him in his little homestead way out in the rural sticks of this dystopian world that he's in.
Yeah, Chandler is a bit of a outsider hermit type, and having to deal with a 5-year-old is a little bit different for him. So.
When is this happening? Like, what's the setting for Chandler and Emerson?
Yeah, the story of Interface takes place towards the end of this century.
It's in the near future.
Yeah, it's really in the near future.
It's a part of history that we might be able to do something about it at this point.
Yeah, about 50 years, maybe. About 50 years from now.
So it doesn't give us an exact year, but it's kind of that like just around the corner for society and things are not going well. Can you give us like a little teaser on some of the things that are happening in Chandler and Emerson's world that are not going well?
Well, the thing that has happened is that 50 years prior, probably within about 10 or 15 years to now, society collapsed. It collapsed in part because of our collapse that's already occurring in terms of our farming, the poisons in our air, the poisons in our water, our inability to reproduce properly. And of course, then there's a pandemic. And as a result of this pandemic, most of the people on the planet die. So we're dealing with a much reduced population that has been doing its best to recover for the past 50 years. And then enter Chandler, who's kind of a recluse living out in the wilderness, but he's a technical person. He came from the city, and he raises Emerson out away from all people to sort of keep him from being poisoned by their ideas.
And of course, like any young person, what's out there, the lure of the technology. Emerson wants to learn to fly, and even though they're living in this sort of homesteady rural situation in the woods, and they go hunting and that sort of thing, I mean, he can see the aircraft, and he has some memories, there's a reason he wants to fly. And flying is a safe space for him, and he's yearning to go back there. And of course, that's the last thing his grandfather wants. So there's that tension there.
And his grandfather is an old man. He's in his 70s, and he's raising a 5-year-old. So there are some issues, with his physicality and the way this young boy has to deal with this old guy that's got a real attitude towards the place that the young boy wants to visit. He wants to go there. And so that's pretty much the setup. By the time he's 17, he actually does get into the city and does learn to fly. And there are several adventures that he encounters after
Perfect. Okay, that's a perfect setup. And what would you compare this book to? So if someone likes reading, dystopian literature, they would like Interface. Are there any other kinds of books you're like, yeah, if you like that kind of book, you'll enjoy the story of Interface?
When I've been watching the Amazon Prime version of The Peripheral that William Gibson wrote, and there's some real interesting similarities between the two. And the funny part is that I never read Peripheral. I didn't even know it existed. I knew who William Gibson was, but I wrote this book to illustrate what a disruptive technology like the interface actually can do to societies. And there are definitely similarities. It's sort of cyberpunk because it envisions technology in a world where technology means something very differently than it does now. And there are struggles between people that were really hurt by technology that would like to eliminate it, and other people who are using it to base all of their power in. And then we've got this guy, Emerson, sort of cast into the middle of it, who didn't grow up in the city. So he doesn't know what these people are up to. And so he has a harsh education ahead of him.
I think it can also appeal to a wide range of people. I mean, people who read Starhawk's stories about, alternative ways of living and ways of thinking.
Or the Firefox books, for that matter.
Yeah, really, I mean, it appeals to anybody. I mean, you will find even politically, the right and the left finding this common ground of what do we do about the forces that are controlling our lives today. So.
And as there are people in this novel that have relationships with one another, there's somewhat of a romance that threads through the whole thing. And it's not just a normal romance either. It's a romance between more than two people. So, that has that aspect too. Plus there's a cat,
the cat,
a great big cat. Everybody likes cats.
If you like dystopia, if you like technology, if you like great, well-developed characters, young man and grandfather, and trying to get back into the city and find yourself, kind of a little bit of that coming of age, a little bit of romance, wrap all that up together. You've got Interface. If you want to check it out, you can actually go to paperravenbooks.com/interface. They'll take you over to Amazon. You can grab a Kindle version for free right now. We're launching the book. We want to help get the book out to as many people as possible. So you can grab the Kindle version for free right now, load it up for the weekend, or grab the physical version as well. So whatever type of book you like to read, it's there and ready for you. Go to paperravenbooks.com/interface or click the link right next to this video. And Ron and Karen, y'all have such a fascinating background to be bringing this book to life, right? Because you both have MFAs in creative writing and interdisciplinary art. And then Karen, you also have your ABD, your all but dissertation on your doctoral sustainability education degree, and y'all live on a farm, a sustainable farm in the Southeast. I think y'all said it was like 34 acres and you got a whole bunch of sheep and things out there. So you're really bringing a lot of yourselves to the book. Why did you want to write the book now? Why do you feel like now is kind of the relevant time for a book like Interface?
Well, we live in scary times. I mean, we're at a nexus where we can actually change things, or, we're going over the cliff, and we have a whole bunch of people who in power who don't recognize that, or are resisting that, or thinking they're going to go underground and live in underground shelters while the rest of us struggle to breathe or something like that. I mean, it's like we have the largest wealth disparity ever in the history. I mean, I forget how far back. I mean, you have to go back to the kings and overlords, which is another theme that comes up in this book. It's like, what's with these people in the city? Who gets to come in and who has to stay out? Who has, advantages with the technology, and who's being controlled by the technology? There's all that going on that we have right now. And so it's very current.
Because a lot of the folks in the city are controlled and they don't know it, and they don't care because they have the ability to occupy themselves and they're fed. So, a lot of concepts of freedom are explored in the novel as well. Like, what is freedom? Can you be free? And I like to mash those kinds of ideas up against one another. We're involved in this kind of situation right now, every day, whether we realize it or not. Our freedoms are, not to get too radical, but our freedoms are always being challenged. There's always a fight. There's always time. You think that you've won, and then you find out that your opposition has been plotting against you in a way that you didn't expect. And they come and they take your rights away from you and your freedoms away from you. You go, gee, I thought we already won this battle. And this happens over and over and over and over. And the only reason that we don't realize that it's happening is because we're fairly convinced that the guys that are running things are doing us a favor. They're not.
That they're going to take care of us.
That they're going to take care of us,
In what way?
They're going to take care of us the way that we take care of our sheep, We shear them and we feed them and we treat them really nicely, and then, they're meat.
And then they become useful for you, right?
Yeah. Although I must say I haven't eaten any of my sheep.
You're benign overlords.
Yeah, right. But isn't that the point? How do we know whether or not we're going to have benign overlords, or are we going to end up with I don't know, pick a name of anyone who's running the technology these days.
Yeah, our favorite enemy right now.
Trust.
Musk.
Like he's going to go off to space when the rest of it all falls apart. So
He's already said that.
Yeah,
He's already made it clear.
So what are they going to leave behind? If you look at like the worst case scenario of who's running things at this point, what will they leave us? And what do we have to fight for? And how is that going to change us? How has it already changed us? If you got to pay the rent, you've got to eat food, and you got to go to that job that's paying you whatever. We are unique. We're living on a farm. We're not in the corporate world right now. We had spent time in the corporate world and academia and all that, but that's not your average person out there. Most people globally work for a corporation. What does that mean? How has it actually changed their values? And, what happens when they have conflicts in those values? Do you choose this or do you choose that? Your kid's sick. Do you stay home with that kid, or do you have to go to work anyway? Or you're sick, look at COVID and how many people went to work sick and continued the problem worse than it was, So yeah, there's lots of questions that come up.
I think that's
I don't know if we give all the answers, but nobody can. And this is just one little narrow way we went with the story. And I'm actually really excited for the next book to come out. So read the first one so you can get to the next one, because that one's going to get into even more meat of it.
That's the sign of great literature, is the story itself is compelling, right? Like Emerson and Chandler and their journey, like it's a compelling read. It's a fantastic read, page turner in and of itself. And it has layers of reflection points for us. What does this mean for us as a society, as a family, as an individual? How can we take the themes and the conflicts and the lessons that we're reading about, and how can that help to sort of change or nuance or fine tune our thinking as well? That's great literature. And to your point, Karen, yeah, this is book one. Jump in with book one because the series is continuing. And yeah, good news is you can grab book one right now. So go to paperravenbooks.com/interface. It's linked next to this video, and you can go ahead and grab book one right now while you're here and while you're thinking about it. And Ron and Karen, y'all have a really fascinating work relationship. Obviously, you both have the creative writing side. Y'all both live on the homestead farm. And Karen, you have additional academic research in the sustainability education field. How do y'all work together, like in sort of researching and writing? What does that work look like?
All the time.
Oh yeah, really. It's like 24/7. At the end of the day, when we're like really pooped and we're like, oh, let's just start on Netflix and see what we're gonna watch. We're gonna watch something that relates to what we're working on. That's just who we are. We don't really shut it off.
And we're fans of Neil Gaiman, The Sandman, Shadow and Bone, Karen just did a whole bunch of deep reading on the books of Shadow and Bone.
But also, I mean, like, okay, so we wake up in the morning, before I go out and milk or let my sheep out or whatever. We have a little Jersey cow and we drink that milk. I mean, it's like people in urban situations have no idea what it's like to drink real milk. It's like, I'm addicted to it and I'm sorry that you can't have it, but I love it. And if you can find a farmer that you can get your milk from, go for it. And a lot of our metaphors that we use are agricultural based, farm based. So those things are embedded in our daily lives. But as writers, it's like we'll come up with ideas, and plus we've been like, what do we do about this world we're living in? We're constantly like, what is the truth, and searching for the answers of how do you fix things, and can we fix things, and is climate change just like, how do we deal with all this? And we're constantly navigating that. And plus, I'm feminist, but I was a stay-at-home mom in that I homeschooled my kids, and we're radicals. I mean, that's gonna have to. Well, that's a big reveal. It's probably not a reveal, and yet our society doesn't value things that you can't add to the GDP, gross domestic product. If it doesn't have a dollar sign in it, it's not valuable. And yet our air, our food, our time, our thinking, all of those things we value highly, and it's like none of that is really measurable.
Our cat videos on the internet. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but I mean, everybody loves kitten and baby pictures and puppy pictures. And I mean, what's up with that? We love life, and yet everything costs money, and she can't pay rent, so it's okay for her to starve. What?
Or end up on the street or whatever. But anyway, I mean, historically, also as a feminist, women's work has been appropriated by their husbands or boyfriends, right? So in order to keep us happy, we basically said, it's like, if I'm doing the milking the cow and Ron's not as physical as I am, we kind of got those roles reversed. I'm out there doing stuff and he's more.
If it's a machine, I do it.
Yeah, he does the machine stuff. Okay. But anyway, he starts writing about something that I've experienced. It's like
the birth scenes.
Did he steal that idea from me? How can he do that? It's like, that's me. It's like in some indigenous cultures, it's like that's stealing your soul if you take someone else's story or someone's idea, and or giving credit. We want to give credit to all people who bring the value to what we do. I mean, like, we really need to give credit to our sheep and our horses and our grandchildren. I mean, our grandson is actually named Emerson. So,
his name is Emerson Lloyde.
Emerson Lloyde.
But he doesn't have an E on the end.
But in all these things that come into the creative work are usually not acknowledged in patriarchal capitalism. So, RK, Hillhouse, Ron and Karen, Hillhouse is our farm. It's all in there. All the credit is there. And that's sort of how we kind of did that process. And then sometimes he'll take the lead and sometimes I'll take the lead, because when you're creating something, you get this idea and you sort of like something sparks inside of you and it's a real internal thing. And then you go with it and you're sort of on this wave of creating. And then after you've had some space, then you go back and if he's the lead, I might add stuff to it, or he'll read it to me and then I'll sit with it.
So Ron, how would you describe kind of your portion of the creative contribution? So we have the image of you typing.
I got the idea to write interface because of one elemental scene, the concept, I guess, behind it. And that's always my process. Is I go with the concept and I find a concept. In this case, it's the implant, it's the interface itself, it's how that changes politics, how it changes the way that people live, how it upsets the balance of power, because to me that's when the most disruptive things happen on the planet, is that we have a new technology that all the wealth changes hands when this sort of thing happens. And from that concept, I created a story around it, and I let the story and the characters tell me what their desires are and how they want to fulfill them. And then I just start writing. And, it's a process where you follow trails. Ursula Le Guin once said, I don't always know what my characters are doing until I think about them, until I ask. Then the information is there and I can get it and I can write it down. And then the process from there is to smooth it out and make it do what it is that you actually wanted it to do, to tell the story that you really were trying to tell. And I got a great assistance in this because I have somebody that can read it and understand all of the concepts that are embedded in it and make it a little less like it's just in Ron's head.
I had, mentioned that we do live outside of the city. And one of the key images for this novel was that we drive into our closest city, and driving through all of these houses on top of houses on top of houses with all these postage stamp lawns, and everything looks the same. And, if the systems like what are going on, globalization, were to break down, we're seeing little snippets of what it might feel like if those systems stopped working. And so if the systems break down, it's like those little houses are all going to be deserted. And what is that going to look like? So we'll be driving into town, and it's like we kind of have this sort of haunting feeling about being outsiders looking in on this world.
If you fly into New York City, as you start to descend, you begin to get an idea of how many miles and miles and miles and miles of houses and streets and electricity and all of the support systems that go into that. And they're not that solid. They're on a tenuous thread. All you have to do is break and we've seen this in the last 2 years, all you have to do is break the supply chain. Break the supply chain in one part and it amplifies exponentially. And I started thinking about what's going to happen to all these houses. All this stuff will just be here and there won't be any people. You ever see that thing where they show what New York City would look like when all the people leave, how fast it would be to regrow, how quick the wilderness would overtake the city? And it's something like 50 years. 50 years and everything starts to break down. If you don't kill weeds, they come right through your concrete. Nothing that people have built will withstand centuries. That's not the way we build anymore. Stuff would completely deteriorate. And that's the world of interface, is what do these few dregs of humanity do with all of this incredible wealth that's just laying around?
And yet I love the cover because you've got Emerson and the cat in this overgrown world, and yet there's this innocence about him. He's got this kind of like, he's hopeful.
He's looking at the stars.
There's a hopefulness to it that I really appreciate.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, it kind of brought us full circle. I think that's why you are continuing to raise sheep and write books and study, sustainable education. It's like there is hope. We do have agency and opportunity, and we can still survive this world, maybe, if we pull together and start to take this all seriously. So I do believe that underneath all this, it's not purely dystopian. There is a hopeful thread that runs through. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like Utah Phillips said, the people that are killing the world all have addresses and names. So if you got an idea of who might be doing something, it's not just this big force that's eating you. There's a way to respond to it. And they don't want you to know that. They would really rather you not realize that they live somewhere and you could talk to them.
We do encourage talking.
Hope is all about communication.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I found her.
Yeah, the cat showed up.
The cat, the inspiration for the cat in the book. Thank you, Ron and Karen, for coming on and talking to us about not only the book, but really your passion and what you want to bring to the world through the book, through Chandler, through Emerson, and through their story. And thank you guys for collaborating and writing this book. I love that you put on the author name. We've got RK Hillhouse, which sort of, as you said, represents all of the contributions into this book. It's a really beautiful way of thinking about bringing a book together. And folks, if y'all are here, you're like, Ron and Karen are my kind of people. Hillhouse Farm is my kind of place. And you want to be a part of this interface series where the whole series is going to go into this near future dystopian with a thread of hope. Go ahead and grab a copy of the book, paperhavenbooks.com/interface. Ron and Karen, any last words for your readers?
Oh, I was thinking, we asked Emerson if it was okay to use his name, and he gave us permission. So we honored and respect that. I think that's kind of like what the book is about. It's about respect.
That's important. It's consensual. I didn't just grab his name and make a story out of it. And I wanted to give him something. I think that he'll appreciate it when he gets older. He'll be able to tell people, if he wants to, that his grandfather wrote this sort of to him. Unlike Milne, who didn't really ask his son if he wanted Winnie the Pooh written about him, and he hated it for his entire life.
Thank y'all for being here. And I think, what you just highlighted was the hope for the future generations, right? I mean, even be able to say Emerson will appreciate when he's older. It's like, we have hope for the future generations, and all of us have, if not kids and grandkids, nieces and friends' kids. And we want something for the future. And I think that's the hope that's embedded inside of Interface. So y'all go grab a copy, paperhavenbooks.com/interface. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Karen. And we will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.